Steve Kerr. Nowadays, you know him as the head coach of the Golden State Warriors. Once he joined the team, he was a major factor in turning them from a regular playoff team into a dynasty. Perhaps the greatest and most memorable moment of his career happened in the last few seconds of the 1997 finals, playing alongside Michael Jordan, where Kerr hit the championship-winning shot. Although he was just a role player throughout his entire NBA career, he had a ton of great moments and clutch performances. However, what many people don't know is about Kerr and his interesting family history in the Middle East, particularly in Armenia and Lebanon. How's it going, fellas? My name is Andy, and we're going to take a look at Steve Kerr's family history in the Middle East after World War I, and also an event that changed his life forever. And yes, I did say World War I a long time ago. Back in the early 1900s, Steve Kerr's grandfather, Stanley Kerr, was a missionary on the front lines of the American relief effort in the Middle East. Stanley Kerr arrived to the area around 1919 with the goal of helping out the citizens there. Around the time, the area was involved in what we call now the Armenian Genocide. It was a period of time between 1914 to 1923 where the Ottoman Empire exterminated over 1.5 million Armenians. It drew some comparisons to the Holocaust, which I'm sure everyone knows about. Although the Armenian Genocide did not have as many casualties, it was still one of the worst killings in history. So when Stanley Kerr arrived there, he was in charge of documenting the American relief efforts there. Him and his crew were rescuing Armenian women and children, providing them with shelter and food, and doing anything they can to improve their situation. A few years later, and Stanley transferred to Marash, a city located in what we know now as modern-day Turkey. When he got there, his goals still remained the same. He continued to help out the Armenians there who were in danger and provided them with more support. Years later, Stanley wrote a memoir of his time there, which was called The Lions of Marash. In the book, he describes how Mustafa, the president and founder of the Republic of Turkey, brutally killed off the Armenians in his territory. The methods of murder included things like mass burnings of the Armenian churches, drowning, injecting poison, toxic gas, pretty much all the usual things you'd expect from a massacre like this. When things eventually calmed down, Stanley and his wife Elsa settled down in Lebanon and ran an orphanage there for Armenian children who lost their parents. Then later on, the two of them had a son named Malcolm Kerr, who would eventually become the father of Steve Kerr. As for Malcolm, he was born and raised in Beirut, Lebanon, near the campus of the American University of Beirut, where his parents Stanley and Elsa taught for 40 years until their death. Malcolm, on the other hand, relocated to the United States during World War II, and he attended Princeton and Johns Hopkins University, where he earned his master's degree in Arabic studies. By the 1950s, he returned to Lebanon and became a professor at the same university where his parents taught at. And he became heavily involved in politics around this time too. And this piece of information is really important for what's about to happen later on. So anyway, he also met his wife Anne in 1953, and they had multiple children together, with Steve Kerr being born in 1965. In the following years, Malcolm continued to work at the university, but soon something horrible happened that would change their family's life forever. So it first started when Malcolm became president of the American University in Beirut in 1982. And just 2 years into his presidency in 1984, he got shot and killed by two unknown people right outside of his office. And up until this day, his assassination is still a mystery, and we don't know what the killer's motives were, but it looks like it was kinda related to an Islamic terrorist group around the area. The death of his father really hurt Steve. He was only 18 years old when Malcolm got killed, and his life became a roller coaster of emotions. Before then, Steve constantly had to travel between different countries growing up, from Lebanon to Egypt to the US. He never had a permanent home. However, after his father's death, Steve changed his entire thought process. His mother, Anne, said that Steve knew his father loved basketball, and now he wanted to do everything he can to become a great basketball player, because he knew his father would have loved to see him play. Anyway, at his own wish, Kerr stayed in the States, specifically in California and Arizona, where he played college ball. When looking back at his father's death, he stated that, quote, "Before my father was killed, my life was impenetrable. Bad things happened to other people. I thought I was immune from anything like that, and so was my family." This was the first time that Kerr had anything bad happen to him in his life, and although he was devastated by it, it was also a wake-up call. As a child, he'd hear stories about the Armenian War and what those people had to go through, realizing so many children there have lost their parents. Kerr said that his murder made me understand the pain that others experience. It's made me realize that millions of people go through these things. Unfortunately for Steve, not everyone was willing to show him sympathy. A few years later in 1988, when he was playing in a regular college game between Arizona and Arizona State, the fans of Arizona State verbally assaulted him by taunting him about his dead father. A group of 10 to 15 students started to shout things related to his father and PLO, which used to be considered a terrorist organization at the time. Steve stated that after he heard all of these taunts, he started shaking. He was in tears and it brought back memories of his dad, but it was just sad that people would do something like that. And to be honest, stuff like this happens way more often at college games than we want to believe. A lot of fans say a bunch of dumb stuff to try and get into the players' heads, but sometimes it just goes way too far. And this was one of those times. Because it was a personal attack and it was something that the fans at Arizona State knew would really hurt Steve. However, Steve pushed through it and ended up having one of his best games of the season. He scored 20 points in the first half, leading Arizona to a 101-73 victory over Arizona State. A few days later, Charles Harris, who is the athletic director at Arizona State, personally sent Steve a letter of apology. In the letter, Harris said that the school sincerely regrets their actions and the mental anguish that the crowd caused. But regardless of all these apologies, something like this is definitely hard to forget. And later on in Steve's life, he stated how he used this incident as motivation to keep pushing through, especially during his NBA career, because at times he wasn't sure if he was going to make the team or not. So speaking of the NBA, Kerr was drafted in 1988 as the 50th overall pick. I won't get into the details of his NBA career, but I'm sure everyone has an idea of how it went. He spent his first couple of years scrapping for minutes in Phoenix, Cleveland, and Orlando. Then he joined the Bulls in 1993, and from then on, he built his legacy as one of the best shooters in history. As of now, he still holds the record for the highest career three-point percentage ever, at 45.4%. And even though he didn't shoot them at a high volume like Steph Curry or Klay Thompson today, defenses kept their eye on him all the time. Before he became head coach of the Warriors, Kerr worked as an analyst for TNT, but he also had a brief stint as a GM of the Phoenix Suns. From 2007 to 2010, he was the general manager of the Suns and made some notable trades. One of them was trading away Sean Marion to the Miami Heat in exchange for Shaq, which didn't exactly work too well. But then he made another trade later on that sent Boris Diaw and Raja Bell to the Charlotte Bobcats for Jason Richardson and Jared Dudley. This trade would help the Suns have their best playoff run in recent history, making the Western Conference Finals in 2010. And finally, in his last year as the Suns GM, Kerr made a really good move, which was actually not making a move at all. He was very hesitant in re-signing Amar'e Stoudemire to a 5-year $100 million max contract, because he was afraid that his body would not hold up. And it turns out he was actually right. In the long term, not re-signing Stoudemire was probably better for the Suns. A few years later, and Kerr found himself as the head coach of the Warriors, and we all know what happens from here. So yeah, that sums up the story of Steve Kerr's family history and basketball career. I hope you enjoyed that video, and make sure to leave a thumbs up if you did. Thank you everyone so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.